Hello, I'm Nima Rajan. Finance Minister Bill Morneau says the federal government's new loan program for Canada's largest corporations is designed to keep employees on their payrolls and avoid bankruptcies. He says companies that receive bridge financing through the Large Employer Emergency Financing Facility will have to give the government an option to take an equity stake in the business or provide a cash equivalent. Minister Morneau says the terms are designed to make sure companies using the program receive bridge loans rather than bailouts. Statistics Canada says the annual inflation rate turned negative in April as the economy came to a standstill in the first full month of the pandemic. The agency reports the consumer price index for April fell by 0.2% compared with a year ago as gasoline prices plunged by 39.3%, which is the largest year-over-year decline on record. But the prices for other consumer goods were up, particularly for cleaning products, toilet paper, and food, according to the agency. Well, as people begin to venture into public spaces more often over the coming weeks, masks may be a more common sight. A new poll by Leger and the Association for Canadian Studies found that 67% of respondents said that they have already taken to covering their face as a means of protecting against COVID-19. About half of respondents across the country said they would wear a mask to the grocery store and on public transit, and 42% wear one to the pharmacy. Only about 10% said they would wear a mask to take a walk. The co-director of the Innovation Policy Lab at the University of Toronto says Canada can't count on global supply chains in times of crisis and needs to retool itself to support the development of homegrown entrepreneurs. Dan Bresnitz says the COVID-19 crisis is exposing the shortcomings of Canada's economy. He says Canada needs policies aimed at creating more small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as enabling larger Canadian companies to ramp up operations. Newfoundland and Labrador's Conservative leader Ches Crosby says the provincial legislature should reopen debate on a bill restricting travel into the province. Entry to the province has been banned during the COVID-19 pandemic, but Mr. Crosby says the Liberal government has not lived up to the commitments that family reunification would be accommodated. He says if the bill is not amended, it should be repealed. Families with kids in kindergarten through grade 12 who have been impacted by COVID-19 are eligible for $250 per student from the Yukon government. The Yukon government says the funding should help offset some costs for families with children who have been learning from home during the pandemic. Families are eligible for the one-time funding if their kids are enrolled in a Yukon public school and they are not already receiving funding support for home education or BC distance learning. British Columbia's provincial health officer says the government will not impose travel restrictions or force self-isolation on people who cross provincial boundaries. Dr. Bonnie Henry says those kinds of restrictions aren't practical within Canada, where essential trade and transportation occur between provinces. She also notes that you can't assume that an Alberta license plate in BC means that the driver is a visitor, since many people work in one province and live in the other. A Canadian pastor charged in Myanmar for violating a ban on large gatherings has made his first court appearance after being released from quarantine. David Law was charged in mid-April with violating an article of the Natural Disaster Management Law. He faces possible punishment of up to 3 years in prison, a fine, or both. The law was invoked in mid-March to combat the spread of COVID-19. The charge involves a religious gathering that Pastor Law held on April 7th. The judge ordered his detention for 15 days, pending a possible trial while police continue their investigations. In the U.S., President Donald Trump says he wants to hold up coronavirus funding for Michigan, saying that the state had mailed absentee ballots to millions of voters. However, Michigan used federal coronavirus relief funding to mail applications for absentee ballots, not the ballots themselves. President Trump has been vocal in his opposition to voting by mail. He claims that the practice is ripe for fraud, even though there is little evidence of wrongdoing with mail-in votes. Trump says he'll be asking aides about holding up the funding. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the government is making fast progress on implementing a COVID-19 tracking program by June 1st. The PM says 25,000 trackers will be able to trace the contacts of 10,000 new cases a day, which is up from the current level of 2,400 daily cases. The leader of the main opposition Labour Party criticized Johnson and his government for not having an effective track and trace system in place nearly 10 weeks into the pandemic. An Israeli court has ordered Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to appear for the opening of his criminal trial in Jerusalem on Sunday. Mr. Netanyahu's attorneys had asked the court for an exemption from appearing for the opening of the proceedings. The court rejected the request on Wednesday, saying that the accused appearing for the reading of the indictment is the rule and there are no grounds for granting him an exemption in this case. The Prime Minister was indicted on charges of fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes last year. A human rights group says it was callous and inhumane for Singapore's Supreme Court to sentence a drug suspect to death on the popular video chat app Zoom. The hearing was held virtually because of the city-state's COVID-19 lockdown. Human Rights Watch says the death penalty is already cruel and inhumane, and the use of Zoom to deliver the sentence makes it even worse. A massive cyclone, packing the equivalent power of a Category 3 hurricane, has slammed into the coastline of India and Bangladesh. More than 2.5 million people in the storm's path have already fled to shelters in an evacuation made all that more challenging by the coronavirus pandemic. Authorities are warning that the cyclone's 168 km/h winds could cause extensive damage to homes, and its storm surge may push seawater inland, flooding crowded cities. Well, with people socially distancing in their homes for weeks during the COVID-19 lockdowns, people are turning to their kitchens as a way to alleviate their boredom. The surge in bread making and cookie testing has been dubbed Distractibaking. One chef points out that most people haven't had the time to devote to home baking until now, when we all have nowhere to go. Well, that'll do it for today's news update. I'm Nima Rajan. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll see you next time.